nice having the recording. So if we miss something during the shiur, we always...
Okay, terrific.
Very nice.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is to look at, it's quite a strange story. You know, after the Torah tells us about the Para Adumah, the Torah then tells us, it goes into a story of where Miriam passes away. So what I'd like to look at is just to try and understand that a little bit more. We look into the Torah just to get like a real insight, perhaps, into what is happening, because as we'll see, it doesn't seem to really make sense. So the Torah says the following, and it's a very well-known story. We all know about it. The Torah says, "Vayavo b'nei Yisrael v'chol ha'edah midbar tzin." So the b'nei Yisrael, the whole assembly, arrived in midbar tzin, b'chodesh harishon, in the first month. And what happens is, vayeshev ha'am b'kadesh. Everybody, the people, vayeshev b'kadesh. They start to dwell in Kadesh, and in that space, it seems to be almost unexpectedly, Vatamat Sham Miriam Vatikaber Sham. Miriam dies, Vatikaber Sham, and she's buried there. You'll notice something interesting, that we know that when a person passes away, what do? We go through a process of shiva. We go through a process of a space of where we try and make sense of the death. We try and understand this. Here is Miriam, prophetess, and what we see here is that Torah just tells us very simple. She dies, and she gets buried there in this place in Midbar Tzin, and that's it. And then what happens is, v'lo haya ma'im la'edah. There is no water for the Edah. Vayikalu al Moshe v'Aaron. So there's no water. Since there's no water, what happens is, once again, Moshe and Aaron are now going to bear the brunt of the upset of the people. But just listen carefully to how the story unfolds. But it says, "V'lo haya ma'im la'edah." What is an Edah? So Edah,
a witness.
We understand an Edah is like a group. It's a group. It's the community.
Congregation.
From here, the congregation. So the congregation. Let's call it that. So here Rashi says, when the fact that it says "V'lo haya ma'im la'edah," Rashi quotes from the Gemara in Tanis, "Mikan shekol 40 shana ya lahem ha'be'er b'zchut Miriam." From here we learn that for the 40 years that while they were in the desert, they had this water b'zchut Miriam, in the merit of Miriam. Now, just as an aside, and I never really seen much on this, if the whole thing is that the water's in the zchut of Miriam, how come she passes away, she's buried there, and there is no more conversation about Miriam? And I think that's quite startling. There's a certain level of perhaps a lack of hakarat hatov. There's a certain level of something that seems to be missing, that she's not given the cover that we would have expected for this to happen. I mean, the way Rashi presents it, how does she die? Afi ben Shikameta, she died with the kiss of Hashem. And so why does it say that? Because it's not appropriate for Hashem to be kissing a woman. I mean, that's how that Rashi translates it. But either way, it doesn't give us the sense that the people are missing her in any way. What they really miss is the water. And perhaps it could be said that they didn't realize where the water was coming from. Now, Miriam doesn't play such a fundamental role in all of this, but nonetheless, so the Edah, it says there's no mind for the Edah, vayikalu al Moshe v'Aaron, and they gather against Moshe and Aaron. It's a very powerful image. You can just imagine everybody just coming, gathering around Moshe and Aaron and telling and expressing their dissatisfaction. So the Kuni says, we've had so many other spaces where there's been people have expressed their dissatisfaction. And in all of those places, what we have found is that the HaKadosh Baruch Hu has somehow dealt with that in some type of, call it inverted commas, punishing way. So how come in this case does HaKadosh Baruch Hu not deal with it? So the Chizkuni says very simply, because they didn't have water. This is really the first time that they are fetching and complaining for a real reason. It's very difficult. You can't exist without water. Vayarev ha'am im Moshe. And the people, Vayarev, they caused like this rift, they caused this machlokas with Moshe. Vayomer lemor, and they said, Lu gavanu b'gavai achenu livnei Hashem. He said, Alavai would have died. When Alavai would have died like our predecessors died while they were traveling through the desert, because that's what happened. They just died. And Halavai would have died, because then at least we wouldn't have to go through the pain of thirst. And the pain of thirst is such a terrible death. And why have you brought the Kal of Hashem into the desert to die, us and our flocks? And now they start. And why have you taken us out of Mitzrayim to bring us into this terrible place where we would have died? El Petach Olma, and Moshe and Aaron come mipnei hakahal, in front of the kahal, and I'm not translating that for a reason. They come in front of the kahal, but if you remember, originally it had translated them, it had called them an Eidah. So now how come it suddenly changed from an Eidah to a kahal? And then if we carry on with the Torah says, "Vaydaber Adonai Moshe lemor, kach et hamateh, v'hakel et ha'edah." Take your mateh, take your staff, v'hakel et ha'edah, gather together the edah, atav Aaron achicha, you and your brother Aaron, v'dibartem el hasela. Oh, what do you have to do when you bring them together? You've got to, this edah, you've got to go and you've got to speak to this selah, to the stone, le'einehem, in their eyes, and it'll give of its waters. Now, stones do not have water, but this one does, because at the time when it started out, it was just a stone. And the way the Malbim explains is there was an unbelievable nace that happened, and the nace was that the nature of the of the element of earth, wind, fire, water, the nature of the element of earth, that was the stone, changed to the nature of the element of water. So therefore, this stone is not really a stone any longer. It actually is just simply a crucible of water. So, but it stopped because the water is no longer coming out because Miriam's not around. So Hashem says to Moshe and Aaron, you go speak to this rock, and it'll give of its waters. And they'll take and you'll take water out for them from the stone, and you'll let the Eidah will be able to feed their flocks. Oh, Moshe is now going to do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him to do. He takes this mateh in his hand, as Hashem commanded him. Strange. Oh, well, why else would he do it? Hashem told him to, so you just do it. Vayikalu Moshe v'Aaron, and now they're going to go and gather everybody together. And if you remember, he said, Kach et hamateh, take the mateh, v'hakel et ha'edah. So now, vayikalu, and they do this hakala, Moshe v'Aaron et hu, et hakahal el panei hasela. They don't gather the Eidah as HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded them. They gather the Kahal, El Panei HaSela, around the Sela. And all of a sudden, Moshe Rabbeinu just loses it. Listen here, you rebels. From this Sela, we will bring water for you. And Moshe lifts up his hand, and he claps this rock twice. And the water comes out. And who drinks? The Eidah over Iram. So something's gone a bit strange here. That the Torah tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu told Bnei Israel, told Moshe and Aaron to get the Eidah together. What happens is they don't get the Eidah, they get a Kahal together. When they get the Kahal, Moshe, who it says, did exactly Kashet Zivahu Hashem, had told him to take his mateh. Hashem also said to him, what? Dibartem el hasela, speak to the seller. But he doesn't do that. What does he do? He takes Vayare Moshe Tato Vayachet hasela b'matayim pa'amayim. He hits it twice. But so that's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him to do. Vayetzu mayim rabim. But nonetheless, the water comes out. So let's try and understand what is going on here. So the Malbim tells us there's a difference between Eidah and Kahal. And if we can understand that as our starting point of the story, everything will make a difference. Because then we can understand why it is that Moshe hits the rock, why he gets so upset. All of a sudden, we understand that the people want water. There's nothing to be upset about. When your child says they're hungry, or your grandchild says that they're hungry after you've given them lunch, so then there's what to argue with them about. But if they haven't eaten the whole day and they say they're hungry, you can't be upset with them, right? So what happens? So let's try to understand. So when Hashem says to Moshe, take the Eidah, gather the Eidah says the Malbim are a group of people who are led by their leaders. And Eidah is an organized hierarchical structure of a nation. A Kahal is different. A Kahal is a whole group of people who are not organized. It's kind of like a mob. A mob is the Kahal, which is fascinating that we call our Kahillas, right? The Kahal as a mob. But anyway, I'm not going into that now. But the point is that the Kahal is a mob of people that are not following their leader. And what happens is HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe and to Aaron, what we need to do is there needs to be an orderly space where the people will come towards the cellar that they'd always come to in order to get the water that they needed. And you, Moshe, and you, Aaron, v'dibartem el hasela le'eineihem, in front of that orderly group. Specifically, who would be in front, says the Malbim? Obviously, the leaders. Who are the leaders? Why are they the leaders? Because they are the holiest. They are the most learned. They are the most senior people in the community. They will come and explains the Malbim. It's in their merit that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will do great nisim. Because they are deserving of great nisim. Because they are people that have strived to achieve personal greatness. And a person who strives to achieve personal greatness, both on a spiritual, emotional, perhaps even a physical state, such a person is on a higher level than anybody else. That's why we look up to people of great intellect who've manifested themselves, even people who are wealthy. It always is amazing that when there's political commentary to be made, so then they'll bring actors on. And I'm not talking about like the Jodie Fosters who've got PhDs. I'm talking about your average actor. And all is because they're famous, so they've got what to say. But that's part of our nature, is that people who have achieved certain things become leaders. So the leaders of Am Yisrael are people who have achieved greatness in self, in ruchnius, in gashmius, in every aspect. Those are the people that should be gathering around, la'eineihem, and in front of them, there will be these great miracles. V'natan Meimav. And what will happen is that because it's these people, the rock will give of its water to them. And you, Moshe Rabbeinu, will give that water, and the Eidah and all the Be'iram, and this orderly space and this orderly group of people going from the highest of the leaders all the way down in the hierarchical structure that we're supposed to have in a normal general society. Those people get what they need. And Moshe Rabbeinu goes out. Vayikach Moshe milifnei Hashem. He takes it from Hashem, which means you can see that he's now walking out towards, and you can see him with purpose, walking out towards this rock to say what he has to do. Vayikalu Moshe v'Aaron et hakahal. What happened? Where did the Eidah become a kahal? Explains the Malbim, the people just wanted to see what was going on. They lost their derech eretz. They lost their reverence for the structure that is supposed to be, and therefore you had your average shmo standing in the front rows, not giving the leadership, the elders, the right to come to the fore, the right to be there when all these things happen, and therefore it's called a kahal. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu says, the Malbim says to Bnei Yisrael, Shimuno hamayrim, you rebels. What are you rebels? Not against God. No one rebelled against God. No one said anything. They said, we need water. You're moirim. You're rebelling against the structures. You're rebelling against the elders. You're rebelling against the reverence that we're supposed to have for people who know more, who are more experienced, who have greater growth, against the Zakanim, let's call it, as we would understand that. He says, therefore, should I bring water for you from this rock? Should I? Is it something that I should do? And if you remember, what it had said is that when Hashem said to them, because why? You give them water from the rock, because Natan Meimav, it will give of its water. Moshe Rabbeinu is so upset with them because they are now paying in a space that is not worthy of them to be getting this miracle. So Moshe Rabbeinu lifts up his hand and he's angry. You can see that he's angry. You can feel the angry. Nowhere did it say that he needs to pick up his staff at all. Moshe, if you look at the words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, take the mateh, just take this staff. It doesn't say hit anything, it doesn't say lift it up, it doesn't say anything. Just Yarim Moshe et yado, he lifts up his hand and he whacks the rock twice. Rashi says, why does he hit it twice? Lefisha barishona, for the first time he hit it, lo hotzi ela tipin, it only had like little droplets. Why? Kadosh Baruch Hu never told him to hit it. He told him to speak to it. Okay, so what happens? So that first he hits it, it comes over. Then they start speaking. It doesn't bring. Shema tzarich lakos about karishona. Says, Moshe Rabbeinu says, maybe now, under these circumstances, I need to hit it like I did the first time. Like I did the first thing, it's the same rock. And so Moshe Rabbeinu hits it again for the second time. And what happens? Lots of water comes out. What happened? It's not that, it doesn't say that the rock gave forth its water. Moshe Rabbeinu opened up the rock with his clap. He opened up that shell, that crucible that was holding this water. And once it was opened up, so then the water comes out. But it's not the rock giving forth its water. It's a different type of miracle. The first miracle would have been a miracle where the rock itself would give its water. Now, the water is being forced out on its own. And why is that? And what is really happening here? What should have happened? What does it mean, v'dibartem el hasela? What is Moshe Rabbeinu supposed to say to the rock? Okay, hello, rock. Can I please have some water? It's not a fairy tale. This is like real stuff happening. What is Moshe Rabbeinu? What's this whole business all about? So the Netziv tells us, and we understand. You've got the Edah, you've got the Kahal, you've got a whole lot of moving parts happening in this incredibly momentous story. Why does Hashem tell him to take the staff? So he says, Moshe. We know it's the staff that Moshe used for everything that he did. It was always in Moshe's hands. So why does he take it? Because there's something about the staff. This staff has always been the one that has been in somehow involved in all the revealed miracles that happens. And so therefore, it is going to be used by Moshe Rabbeinu. When a nace is going to happen, Moshe Rabbeinu is going to have the staff with him. But it's not going to be through the staff. And that's why this miracle is supposed to be a completely different space. It's supposed to be the dibartem el hasela. And then the Netziv says, Eina kavana shidbru im hasela. It doesn't mean that you're supposed to speak with the rock, right? And say to please give water, right? The rock doesn't hear. It might give water that it wasn't originally going to go do, but it's not. It doesn't have ears. So therefore, what is it that he was supposed to do? Says the Netziv. It's very simple. You know what he was supposed to do? Meha ba'er, says the Netziv. Shayad ko niyula teva. It's become natural. It's become a natural thing for there to be this water in this rock. Because why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, right? You created at Erev Shabbos on the first week of creation, that there would be this rock from which water would be forth, and now it's giving it forth. Now it's all part of it, but we understand that in order for us to get these brachas from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what does it demand from us? Demands tefillah. Demands that we daven. Demands that even though we know that the space has potential to give rain, the space has potential for growth, the space has potential for everything, right? What it really requires is tefillah. And Moshe Rabbeinu is the ultimate mitpalel. He's the ultimate person who can daven. Whenever he davens, things change, the whole world. And so therefore, we know that Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillah would be mekubelet, would be heard. Vayaratzon, what was the intention of Hashem? Sheyidabru Moshe v'Aaron davar halacha v'tochacha. The idea was that they would speak not to the rock, but they would speak Torah, they would speak a little bit of Musar, and then they would use their words to do what? They'd come together as a community and they would daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then v'nitan mimeimav, they would give it, we just give off it. Would be the natural consequence of tefillah is that the rock would give forth its water. Where do we see that? We see that right again, the beginning of creation, where it says that there was no rain. Why? Because there was no one to daven. So since that's the whole point, davening enables or empowers or releases, so to speak, the bracha of the Ribono Shel Olam on one level of davening. It doesn't always, sometimes Hashem says no, but that's the idea. So what happens? So Moshe Rabbeinu goes there and he's supposed to cry out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu together with the people. And that's why it says that he says, Vayikach Moshe, he takes his mateh, he gathers everybody, and he gives them a shtickle musar. Shimonu HaMoirim. But what he should have done, after he'd given him the musar, what he should have done is he should have davened. And he didn't daven. What he did do is that he saw in front of him this group of people who had completely and totally gone against the way things should be, because they should be an ordered space. There should be the zakenim in the middle, and there should be the people around him. There shouldn't be this absolute anarchy that is happening. And so therefore Moshe Rabbeinu, B'ka'as, says the Netziv, Amar Moshe Dvarim Elu B'ka'as, Ad she'na'alma mimeno halacha berur la'agid l'rabim. He was so angry that he forgot the halacha that he was supposed to teach them. And then he's so angry, he couldn't find the space for tefillah. He couldn't find that means within his own heart to connect in tefillah, in davening. And if that's the case, how on earth is he going to make this miracle of the water to come out? So it must be that he's going to use the previous things that he'd always used, which was his mateh in his hand, to make the miracle to bring the water out. And that's why the Netziv explains the first time he hits it, a little bit of water comes out. The second one, a lot of water come out. He said, "Be'emet nishar me'az teva hasela shiyu meimav mu'atim kasher kainu ad hayom." He says that's what happened now. Is that it always gave a little bit of water, never gave much from that point on. And the reality is they didn't need so much water. They had enough to give what they needed, but it wasn't flowing like it always done before in the merit of Miriam. Why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu lost the opportunity to teach them the power of tefillah, which is quite a thing. And it's so sad, and I want to look at a little bit deeper. It's so sad that here is this man, Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher, our leader, everything is Moshe Rabbeinu. He was so great, but he just somehow not seeing the structure of what Bnei Israel should be. It seems to be that he lost it a little bit, that he lost his focus on what he was supposed to achieve. And that's what says, you didn't sanctify me. What is the ultimate sanctification of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Is when we see HaKadosh Baruch Hu working in the world. So he didn't manage to achieve that. And it was so sad. And it was so sad. And because of that, he loses his opportunity to go into Eretz Yisrael, because Eretz Yisrael is the place where tefillah works. Eretz Yisrael is the place where you need to daven. If you don't daven, it's not a place, there's no natural rainfall. And all well, I mean, it's a natural rain season, but we have to daven for that rain. It's got to come powerfully. It doesn't just happen. Everything is hashgacha pratis in Eretz Yisrael. And it seems to be, the way the Netziv wants to present it, that Moshe Rabbeinu lost his opportunity. But I want to just go back one step. Why is it that the Be'er Miriam comes, the Be'er is in the schus of Miriam? Why the water? So we understand, because she was the one who protected Moshe at the water. We understand that, but I think there's something much more than that, and I think it is that she is the ultimate nurturer. She's not just a neviah. She sits in the background, someone you take for granted, just like all the water. We've lost a little bit of that, taking water for granted. Baruch Hashem, in Joburg, with the terrible water problems that we're having. When we were in Cape Town, water was a real thing. It was a real thing because we didn't have any. And if we didn't have it, it became a certain level of consciousness. Miriam now is showing us that same thing. When she passes away, all of a sudden, the people lose their ability to just easily get water. And when they lose their ability, they realize, perhaps we could say, that is the beauty of Miriam. She was always in the background, but she was always pushing forward. She's the person who ensured that Moshe Rabbeinu would be alive, because she's the person who ensured that her parents would come together once again, even though they said that this terrible gezerah of Paro is something that we're worried about. We'd have to kill the child. She is the one that behind the scenes is always pushing it. And it's interesting to think that during this terrible time, Moshe Rabbeinu, we know, was close to his sister. We know he had a deep relationship with her. Ana Hashem el narafan Allah. He davened for her. He wanted her to survive. He needed her. She was his right-hand person. And at this point in time, he's stuck by this group of people that are so not grateful to her, who has given them everything. The water that they had was because of her. And all they're doing is complaining. And they're not even complaining in a properly orderly way. They're complaining, they're going out of control. There's this, from an Eidah, it becomes a Kahal. And so Moshe Rabbeinu can't hold that in. Perhaps you could say out of the grief, or perhaps you could say just simply because Moshe Rabbeinu needed that structure. We need that structure in our lives to ensure that our communities run in the proper way. And therefore it says ultimately, when Moshe Rabbeinu does give them water, the Torah says, he hits it twice. Lots of water comes out. When they saw that the water was once again available, everybody just kind of did like a 180 and went back into the structure of the Eidah. They went back into the structure of how it should have been. Moshe Rabbeinu's anger was so profound. And what's amazing to think, and I don't know the answer to this, and we'll end on this, is that did anybody know? We know because the Torah records it. But did anybody there know that Moshe Rabbeinu was supposed to speak to the rock? And he never did. Seems not. The people aren't reacting to the fact that not reacting to the fact that he gets upset. They're reacting to the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu gives them what they want. And once they get what they want, they get back into their structures. But in actual fact, what they really could have had was a lesson, the ultimate lesson in emunah. So they didn't really get what they needed. They got what they wanted. And perhaps in our lives, we have to think, when the manner in which we deal with things, are we trying to get things that we want? Are we trying to get things that we really need? Are we approaching things as an Eidah? Or approaching things as a Kahal? Person in an individual space or in on a communal space. Just a few ideas that I wanted to share with you. Please God, we should move forward. We should learn. We should just hear only besorot tovot in these difficult times. Everybody, please keep safe. Don't be